There's an issue if you're a historian and how you relay history. There's this thing called historians and this thing called historionics or something like that. So one is straight reporting, this is exactly what happened, and the other one is analysis. I prefer the straight reporting. So I'm not going to do too much analysis in here, which is the same way that I approach the book. And this is why I don't do that. And this is why I kind of don't want to read that when I talk about history. So there's this guy, his name is Heraclitus. Anybody ever hear of Heraclitus? Okay, Heraclitus said this pretty famous thing. He says, essentially, you can't step into the same river twice. And if you think about that, that's a pretty stupid thing. Because the river's there, hey, once, twice. I'm stepping in it all these different times. Are you? No, you're not. Why? Once, the river is now downstream. Twice, it's a different river. So when you look at history, you have to be careful that you don't make the mistake of thinking that you're stepping in the same river twice. So the way we talk today is not the way people talked back then. The thing that we think is important today isn't necessarily important back then. And what they thought was important, we probably don't care about today. So if you really want to dive into history, you're going to have to do something that is quite unusual and many people think is impossible. But I am welcoming you to join me in my time machine as a time explorer. So I really like the idea of kind of going back in time and listening or trying to read about certain things. And one of the things that I found out is that, you know the saying, George Washington slept here? Well, with Lafayette, the saying was, Lafayette ate here. So everybody says that, and Lafayette ate everywhere. He did really eat everywhere. And one of the places that supposedly he ate at is this place. It's the Mendon Hotel. This is the town where I'm from. And for a long time, people were saying, hey, he ate there at the Mendon Hotel. But in fact, he never did. So it's like, there's little things like that that people thought happened with Lafayette that I discovered, or rediscovered, I should say. I put in the book, and sometimes it's okay, sometimes it disappoints people. When I gave the presentation in Seneca Falls, they were so excited because they knew that Lafayette took the state road, Route 20, from Canandaigua all the way to where he ended up in Syracuse or thereabouts. But so they were excited because the building I was in, their museum, is on Route 20. Today, different river. Before, Route 20 went over the lake, Cayuga Bridge. So it actually bypassed where their building is today. So, I felt so bad telling them that, but that was where the road was. So there's that sort of thing. So very quickly, who is this Lafayette guy? Lafayette was the hero of two worlds. When he did this tour in the United States, it was like a rock star. Imagine the Rolling Stones doing a tour. Everyone goes see him, or Paul McCartney, some old rock and roll band that everybody that's still alive, and they want to see him. And they go all over the country. It's the same thing. People came from all around to see Lafayette. And, when I talk to young people, though, everyone give it up for America's favorite Michael Lafayette. This is their only introduction to Lafayette. It's very loud. That's from the play Hamilton. So apparently they don't teach about Lafayette in school, which is too bad. Or if they do, kids are doing something else. And it's when I talk to people who are older, they'll remember, oh yeah, Lafayette, everybody knows how great Lafayette is. So a lot of you still have that same spirit that the people in 1825 had in terms of how you approached Lafayette. He was this really larger than life character. He did so many crazy things. When he came to America, he was 19 years old. He had a stepfather. He was rich because his father passed away. His mother remarried a guy who was a diplomat. And his stepfather was very sensitive to the diplomatic consequences of Lafayette siding with the American rebels. So when Lafayette said, hey, gosh, I think I'm going to go to America and fight with the rebels. Well, his stepfather says, oh, no, you're not. All right, now think about this. when you tell a teenager not to do something, what happens? The exact opposite. But the father was smart. The father was saying, I'll make sure, I'll pay attention to all the piers, make sure that he doesn't get on one of these boats and goes out. So you know what Lafayette did? Bought his own boat and took off on that. So that's how he came to America. And when he came to America, he was initially surprised that they didn't give him a higher rank, but the Congress didn't give any foreign mercenaries higher ranks. In the end, though, Lafayette earned it. He was injured in the Battle of Brandywine. He actually met James Madison in the infirmary as he recovered, the young James Madison before he was president. This is still the Revolutionary War. But he met a lot of those guys who ended up becoming the founding fathers. And it was, in fact, James Monroe who invited him officially to come to America in 1824. Now, I say 1825 here because that's when he came through our neck of the woods. But this invitation was very much outstanding for a while. Lafayette was serving in the legislature in France, and he did not want to leave that job because he thought it was really important. Well, he lost re-election one time, and so he calls up, he can't call up, but imagine him calling up James and said, Jimmy, is that invitation still open? And, oh, yeah, it is. And so Lafayette says, yes, I'm going to come. Now, James Monroe, I should remember that. You know why? Who do you think Monroe County is named after? James Monroe. So James Monroe was a very successful president. When he ran for re-election in 1820, who was his opponent? Anybody remember his opponent? You're all right. He didn't have one. It only happened once before, George Washington. So James Monroe was so popular that nobody ran against him. In fact, they coined that era the era of good feelings because everyone was happy. And James Monroe wanted to keep that going forward. Now, unfortunately, you got into a big race in 1824 when he couldn't run again. That was kind of bad. But in terms of like butting heads sort of things. But people were still very happy. And when Lafayette came across in 1824 and 1825, it was very enthusiastic. It was the precursor to the 50th anniversary of the birth of the United States. So this was like the opening act, and in some ways this was the act. Did you ever shake hands with somebody famous?
No.
All right, now I could say I shook hands with somebody famous. So this is what people would go up. They would shake hands with Napoleon. That was the hand that shook the hand of George Washington, and he shook his hand. So it's like you were shaking the hand with George Washington. Man, I'm not washing this thing for a while. So that was the sort of enthusiasm that people had. And when Lafayette came over, the Congress, so Monroe invited him, but Congress passed the act that made it formal, and they said, hey, Lafayette, we got a boat. We're going to send it over to you and bring it here. It's on us. You know what Lafayette's response was? No problem, I got my own. So he came over and he landed in New York City. And in fact, it was a big battle. Where was he going to land? Boston, New York, Philadelphia, all these coastal cities wanted to have the honor of being the landing place of Lafayette. He ends up going to New York. And they kind of knew ahead of time that he was going to go to New York. He gets into New York Harbor on Sunday, August 13th, I think it is, and sends somebody to the mayor of New York. They've got all these big festivities planned. Lafayette's here. What do you want him to do? Where do you want him to show up first? And the mayor says, geez, it's a Sunday. Could you come tomorrow? Because everybody's got the day off. So he actually landed first in Staten Island. He stayed at the vice president's house there. And then he came to New York and he, big, huge party. And that really just kicked things off this is in 1824 now, for the rest of 1824. And in 1820, at the end of 1824, the show was supposed to be over. But so many people invited Lafayette to their towns and cities that Lafayette never said no. He said yes, drove his companions. So Lafayette came with his son, whose name was George Washington Lafayette, and also his traveling secretary, Levasseur. long French name. Levasseur is the only part that I remember how to pronounce. And so a lot of what we get in terms of the history comes from Lavasseur's journal. So we get to see Lafayette's point of view about what he thought when he was visiting these various areas. The other thing that I got was actual newspaper stories from 1825, especially through here, which in many cases published speeches verbatim, which I include in the book. So you can see how people talked back then. There's phrases that like are so awkward that when the editor looks at them, they say, you can't say that. Yeah, you're right, I can't say that, but the guy in 1825 could, and I'm not changing it. So you can see that if you look at that. In Western New York, one thing that you have to recognize about Western New York, I'll give you a quiz. Does it surprise anybody that Lafayette visited Buffalo and Rochester when he was here, right? Makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah. He also visited Canandaigua and Geneva. Well, yeah, sure, because he wanted to see what small-town life was like, right? No. The population centers in 1825 were Canandaigua and Geneva. They had a few thousand people, 5,000 or 6,000. Buffalo and Rochester, barely 1,000 or 2,000. They were really small. Buffalo was a frontier town. Rochester was just starting to build. In fact, Lockport actually had more people because they were there building the canal locks in Lockport. So remember, the canal's not open yet. It opens in October. Lafayette visits in June. Parts of the canal are open, but the real extent from Albany to Buffalo is not open yet. So all that big stuff that happens that builds up Rochester and Buffalo doesn't start until a year or two later. By the way, just for those of you who are trivia nuts, Rochester stayed bigger than Buffalo until about 1850. So it really took that long before Buffalo became the Queen City. You guys know Buffalo? That's the nickname for Buffalo, Queen City? Yeah, it is. I was born there, so I know these things. Well, so Western New York was really still this frontier, and Lafayette experienced that, just like he experienced throughout the other states in America. And I'm going to show you his route here on the map. Here is the first part. His 1824 is in green here. And you can see how he just goes around the coast back and forth. He meets with Jefferson and Monroe and Madison and all those famous guys. And he stays, when he stops, he actually did go up to Albany too in 1824. That was actually right after New York. He went to Albany and then he went to Boston. Anyways, in 1925, he goes on the blue line. So he hits every state in 1825, all the rest of the states in 1825. That's 24 states. That's how many we had. Florida, not a state yet. That's why it's missing. So it wasn't because we ran out of room. It's just not a state yet. And notice the squiggly lines. The squiggly lines represent rivers. Lafayette preferred to travel on water. The straight lines are the land routes. Water was a lot safer, a lot surer. So what happens on land? On land, you can get robbed. You're out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, think about driving today out in the middle on those country roads. What's your biggest fear? Hitting a deer, right? Mm-hmm. So back then it was getting robbed by a highway robber. So you avoid that. The water was a little bit better. It was more certain and everything, except when the boat sinks, which actually did happen to Lafayette right around here. And he lost, so Lafayette, this is in the middle of the night. He's in the boat, he's traveling. Boat starts sinking. It's on this river. It's not that deep water or not that wide of a river, but it starts sinking. And Lafayette's sleeping, and his son is like, imagine his son said, "Oh man, we gotta go. The boat's sinking." He says, "Dad, wake up. We gotta go. The boat's sinking." And Lafayette says, "Okay, yeah, just give me a couple of minutes." No, Dad, the boat's sinking. We gotta get out. Oh, okay. He comes up, he goes like that, and oh wait, I forgot this over here. Dad, let's get out the boat. So Lafayette lost almost everything on that boat. His papers, some of the items were recovered, some like clothing and things like that. He lost a gift that George Washington gave him. So it was I don't know how traumatic an experience it was. I mean, they kind of made light of it when they talked of it. The reporters made a big deal about it, but it was certainly, it wasn't expected. Let's say that. So remember about the traveling, because the traveling is going to come back as he goes through the Western New York region. Because if you see here, this is his route through Western New York. Some of it's on water, some of it's on land. And then we don't know about this route because there's two ways that he could have gone from Mendon to Canandaigua, and it's unclear which one is the true one. So let's look at this route in terms of a color diagram. The red diagram, the red dots are land, and the blue is water, and the green is also land. So I have the red dots here because, and I'm not going to really explain a lot about this, those roads, so it's the state road, Route 20, it's Ridge Road just south of Ontario, Lake Ontario, and it's also the Route 20 that goes along here, along the shores of Lake Erie. And all three of those roads really come from a geological formation that is known as an escarpment. The Niagara Escarpment up top, the Onondaga Escarpment down on the bottom, and then the Portage Escarpment down here. So these are higher portions of land. You think, oh, okay, how did they get formed? This is an interesting story about the roads. Well, you think about when the ice receded, it exposed these escarpments, and the animals came, the plant-eating animals came along this higher land that was not exposed by ice or water anymore. They ate the plants there because that's where the plants grew first. After the plant-eating animals, what came next? Meat-eating animals. After the meat-eating animals, maybe at the same time, comes humans. So this is the roads that were first traveled, and it's an amazing story just in and of itself. And those are, for the most part, Lafayette traveled over here, and over here. He hit all those roads that we travel on today. In fact, when we were coming here, we're on Route 20 coming here, and my mother's in the back there. She says, Ma, this is the same road that Lafayette traveled on. So she's interested in that, because every time we go out, I tell her, hey, Ma, this is the same road that Lafayette traveled. Now, usually it's out in the middle of nowhere, and so now we're in here, in Auburn, coming into Auburn, and her response was, I bet you he didn't have all these red lights. So, so let's move right into his coming in to this. And remember, I told you there are a lot of slides here. We're going to skip through the geology lesson and talk a little bit about this, because this is important. Remember what I said before, or what the sneak preview told you about who thought they owned this land? So this is Connecticut's claim. You can see that it's a swath just along the very edge of New York's southern border. Now, this was resolved prior to the end of the Revolutionary War. This part over here in northeastern Ohio, what would become northeastern Ohio, was still owned by Connecticut. And the Connecticut governor decided, well, I'm going to send people here to settle. The Connecticut had earlier decided to send people in northeastern Pennsylvania to settle, and that started a war, the Pennamite-Yankee War, which started before the Revolutionary War. So these are colonists fighting each other. Paused during the Revolutionary War so they could go on the same side, and then restarted again after the Revolutionary War until they finally started it. It wasn't a big deal, but yeah, some people got killed. But this was the part that was kind of free and open for Connecticut to come through. However, in order to get there, Connecticut had really only two choices. And that is that they could go from this route here, down the state route, down this path that's not really developed yet, into what is now Cleveland, or the southern route, which is through Pittsburgh, Pittsford is south of Rochester, Pittsburgh, and they preferred the northern route. Now, the northern route was great because New York had really started developing the state road, and it was easier to go through. But this road down here wasn't really developed at all. This was still an Indian trail. So in fact, most of the settlers decided to travel during the winter. Why? Because they could take Lake Erie when it was frozen and then go into here. So Connecticut decided that they were going to hire this guy. This guy, his name is Payne, Edward Payne, and he became a general. So he was General Payne, and he was a General Payne. He rode roughshod on the people who made the the road here. This is Connecticut is building this road in New York State because they wanted to get Connecticut people down here. Well, not down here, that's still Pennsylvania, but on the other side where Cleveland is. So he built the road all the way to Portland. Now, if you were in Chautauqua County, I would ask you this question. Everybody knows where Portland is, right? And your answer would be yes. We know where Portland is. The town of Portland is right between Ripley and I forget Dunkirk or whatever. And I'd say yes, but no. Same river, not the same river. This Portland here is actually called Westfield now. So on the maps, and when you read the journals of the travels that Lafayette had through Chautauqua County, they'll mention Portland as a place that they'll stay. So this guy, Payne, he's the one who made the road all the way to Portland. And then he left. He went to Cleveland, became famous. That's why they built a statue of him in Cleveland. And then the Holland Land Company hired James Ellicott to oversee the development in that region. And Ellicott finished the road. And in fact, he finished the road. He hired two guys. One of them is his brother. One started in Portland. The other started in Erie. And they met at the state line. So that's how this road was developed. It was actually the main post office road. It's called the Buffalo and Erie Road, or the Main Road, or the Buffalo Road, or the Erie Road, or Ellicott Road. Lots of different names through history. But it is the road that everyone used, including Lafayette. Lafayette came, we won't talk about building Ridge Road or the canal, because that you already know about the canal. They've got their own bicentennial that they're celebrating. You go to one of their seminars, you won't take the Lafayette seminar for that. So anyways, this is the original idea, is that he was going to take the boat from Erie all the way to Buffalo and then go there, but there was a problem. The problem was that they didn't really have the boat locked up. And in fact, in May of 1825, so Lafayette is going to be in Erie, Pennsylvania on June 3rd. So in like second or third week of May 1825, there's this vicious article in the Erie newspaper about how the captain of the steamship Superior was so obnoxious because he wanted to charge money to carry Lafayette from Erie all the way to Buffalo. I mean, it was a really, really nasty letter. A week later, Lafayette writes back himself, and he says, no. Me and the captain, we're good friends. Nothing of this ever really happened. Everything's nice. Steamship Superior wasn't too superior, at least to the people in Erie, Pennsylvania. So on June 3rd, Lafayette is in Erie, Pennsylvania, and the people in Chautauqua County want Lafayette to come through. So they really rush and they try to make plans, and they invite Lafayette to come visit their county. And what does Lafayette say? Yes, right. Come on, louder. You're Lafayette. Hey, come and visit the Chautauqua County. Yes. All right, good enough. So this guy by the name of Walter Smith, he was a young guy in his early 20s. He was actually pretty rich. He's got a business in Fredonia that then eventually moved to Dunkirk. But he paid for the whole thing. He paid for Lafayette to change course from going along Erie, along the Lake Erie, to the road here, all the way to what was eventually going to become Dunkirk, and then take the boat to Dunkirk. Now, let's go to Dunkirk very quickly. These are some guys in Chautauqua County who helped do this. They provided carriages, they provided the welcome committee, a lot of the speeches that you see. He didn't really come until very late at night into Westfield, and the party was so big that Lafayette felt guilty because these everybody, women, children, everybody, they were waiting since about noon to celebrate Lafayette's arrival. He didn't get there till like 1 o'clock in the morning. Did they say, okay, he's here, shake hands, go home? No, they stayed and they partied. And Lafayette tells his secretary, it's getting kind of cold here. I feel bad for the women and children. I don't want them to get sick. We better head off to our next stop, which was the shores of Dunkirk, to pick up the boat. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, they decide to leave, and they finally arrive in Dunkirk just as the sun is rising. But it's not just Lafayette who arrives there. It's a contingent from Westfield and Fredonia, including the women and children that he wanted to go home and stay warm. So they didn't want to let Lafayette go. So Lafayette gets to Dunkirk, and Dunkirk is there's like 25 families who live in Dunkirk. So it's really the last of the frontier in Western New York. They're log cabin type frontiers over there. And it was the forest, the native forest, the virgin forest, went all the way up to the shore. And when the boat came, now the boat's a half-mile off, so Lafayette has to take a little dinghy out to the boat to board the boat. And there's a band playing on the boat, to announce Lafayette's arrival. On the shore, there's cannons that go off to bid the final farewell to Lafayette. On the boat, there's also cannons which respond to the cannons on shore. But here's the thing, you're on shore, and you hear your cannons first, and then you hear the cannons from the boat in front of you where Lafayette is heading. But then that sound bounces off the forest, and you hear it a second time. So that's how thick that forest was behind them. So Lafayette disappears into the Lake Erie waters, or heading towards a boat. You could just imagine it. He's like this solitary figure going, bye, 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 getting smaller and smaller until he goes to the boat. He boards the boat. What boat did he board? The Superior. So, obviously, he wasn't angry with the Superior, and the Superior wasn't angry with them. They were good friends. And he took the Superior into Buffalo. He got into Buffalo in the morning, right before. So he leaves around 7 o'clock from Dunkirk, and he gets into Buffalo just around noontime. Take that back. He doesn't get into Buffalo at noontime. They spot him on Lake Erie. So from Buffalo, they first see him at noon, and they watch him come in. They waited a long time. Because the waters weren't that great, it took 2 hours for the boat to finally land in Buffalo. And when they landed in Buffalo, again, there was all this pomp and circumstance, and people celebrated, and he went through all the same rigmarole that he did everywhere else, shook people's hands, talked with the veterans, went to a fancy dinner, made toasts. All this stuff is documented in newspapers of the time. I was telling him that that's where he met Red Jacket, whether or not the stories that they told each other, which they really did tell each other, but there's some question as well whether or not they actually remembered right when they told the story. But there's some funny stories that go along with that. And the idea that, we're skipping through these rabbit holes. One thing you might have heard is that Lafayette, when he came to Fredonia, he saw the first natural gas lights, because natural gas was discovered there and developed there for use in street lighting. Unfortunately, the first gas lights in Fredonia didn't get lit until October, and Lafayette was there in January. So that's another thing that people just like to say about Lafayette that's not true. So he comes to Buffalo, he has a big meal there, and remember, Buffalo's small, but there's a lot of famous people. If you go to Buffalo now, everybody who's there, big name people, especially the Porters. And one of the guys named Peter Porter, he was in a place called Black Rock. And Black Rock was like a small town, a small village just northwest on the Niagara River, compared to Buffalo, which was really on the mouth of the Buffalo River going into Lake Erie. Both of those places competed to be the end point of the Erie Canal. And Peter Porter was in the assembly. He was very well connected. He advocated for Black Rock, and he lost. So ended up going in Buffalo. But they were still all friends, and they were happy to see each other. And Lafayette actually took the first boat, the Seneca Chief, from Buffalo to Tonawanda. Now remember, the locks the locks in Lockport weren't finished yet, but the canal was not fully open. However, the Friday before Lafayette gets to Buffalo, they put the first water from Lake Erie into the Erie Canal on Buffalo. So that's how he's able to go. And the boat or the canal actually went along the Niagara River. And if you look at, there's actually a picture here that I can show you. The house that was on that entryway where to get the boat for the canal, it's Peter Porter's house. So he went to Peter Porter's house the next morning after he was in Buffalo. From there, he had breakfast there. Then he got the boat. He went to Tonawanda. Tonawanda, he picked up a carriage. And the carriage then took him along the road, along the Niagara River, very scenic. They were very, very impressed by the scenery there, and they ended up in Manchester. And how many people have been to Manchester? No, you haven't. Not a second time stepping into the river. This Manchester is now called Niagara Falls. Back then it was called Manchester. So he meets Peter Porter's brother, Augustus Porter, there, but not before they have a meal. Well, remember, I said Lafayette's eating. He already had breakfast. Now, I guess this might be lunch or something. It's a late breakfast. Who knows? Because it was 10 o'clock when he left Tonawanda, so maybe it was lunch. So he goes to this hotel, and the guy who is in charge of the hotel, big burly guy. He was actually a POW in the War of 1812, but he escaped. So, he's a strong, aggressive kind of guy. He's in charge of the hotel. Lafayette comes up, boop, 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 in the carriage, gets off the carriage, and this guy comes up out of the hotel. "Oh, Lafayette, my friend!" Oh, gives him a big bear hug, and then lifts him up. You can see his feet dangling, Lafayette's feet dangling in the air. And then he carries him like a bride through the threshold, through the door, into the hotel. And they had lunch there. Levasseur, kind of in his notes, kind of says, I think we wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. But Lafayette wasn't offended or anything. In fact, when Lafayette returned to France, he had a pewter chandelier made for that hotel and sent it there. And it remained there, but then the hotel burned down. But don't worry, before the hotel burned down, the guy bought another building and made another hotel that was even bigger and moved the chandelier there. But then that second hotel burned down and no more chandelier. So that's the other thing that you notice about a lot of these places where Lafayette visited, a lot of places anywhere during that era, ended up burning down. It's just the natural cycle of things. So Lafayette travels from Niagara Falls. Oh, as he goes to Niagara Falls, Augustus Porter brings Lafayette to his house and then walks across this bridge across the Niagara River onto Goat Island. So Augustus Porter owned Goat Island. And that's where Lafayette saw Niagara Falls. And he didn't want to leave. It was so pristine. He wanted to stay there forever. He makes an offhanded comment. "Wow. Gus, you selling this? How much you want for this?" So Lafayette was joking around. What he didn't know is that Augustus Porter really did want to buy it or want to sell it. So he tells, without thinking, $1,000. $1,000 for Goat Island. And Lafayette actually pauses for a moment. He thinks about it. He's 67 years old at this point. He says, if I was younger, I would buy it. But, so for him, $1,000 was nothing. So he leaves there. He's very impressed. Then he goes up the river to Lewiston. Lewiston, he stays at a tavern overnight. The next morning, he ends up going to Fort Niagara. Fort Niagara, very early in the morning, he meets the soldiers there. Now remember, Fort Niagara was built by the French. So the French were there first. It was actually the third fort that they built. You know that scene in Monty Python where the guy says, we found this land here, swamp, and we built a castle, but then it sank in the ground. And so we built a castle on that account, but then that one sank in the ground. And we built another castle, that one burned down, and then it sank in the ground. So this is exactly what's happening in Fort Niagara. So there's 3 different forts that really date back to Denonville, which is about 150 years earlier when they first built the fort. So that was a strategic part in the international war between France and Britain. Eventually, Britain took it over. Then it became a strategic port between Britain and America, where they would fight over it. Eventually, America got it. And so Lafayette went there and visited the soldiers and learned about, the history of it, enjoyed it. He circled back to Lewiston and ends up going to, that's where he's meeting Red Jacket in Buffalo. Let me catch up here with the slides because I'm talking way faster than the slides are going because they tend to go their own speed here. So from Lewiston, now he embarks on a carriage along Ridge Road. And there he stops at a tavern, and they transfer from the Niagara Falls or whatever, let's just say the Manchester Committee, to the Lockport Committee. So there are welcoming committees that are greeting Lafayette and transferring over. Just like the Erie Committee transferred Lafayette to the Chautauqua Committee, really kind of like the Westfield-Fredonia Committee at State Line there in Chautauqua County. Same thing happened in this tavern on Ridge Road. And from there, he then turns south and he goes to another road there, another tavern. And in this tavern is where he meets the veterans, the Revolutionary War veterans. And all the time, Lafayette is just so friendly and so familiar. A number of these veterans actually did serve with Lafayette. And they will remember him just like you're going to remember if you ever worked for a big company and you had a boss like he was the big boss of your entire division, you will remember your big boss. Will your big boss remember you? Well, it depends how much trouble you got in, I guess. So with Lafayette, though, whenever a soldier comes up to him and says, "Oh, I remember you, remember we did such and such," Lafayette says, "Oh, yes, of course." So Levasseur is starting to think, does he really remember, or is he just being nice? And Levasseur really could never answer that question. But this is repeated over and over again everywhere in the country, wherever Lafayette goes, including Western New York. So as he leaves this tavern, he goes on the road to Lockport. Now remember, the Lockport, they were still building the locks there, the 5 steps of Lockport, big, huge lock. They had to actually blow up the rock there. So they didn't have cannons in Lockport, but they had explosives. Did they have dynamite? No, because dynamite wasn't invented until, 60 years later or something like that? But they had explosives that they used. So when he showed up in Lockport, he was greeted with these explosives. So he's on this carriage, and this vista is opening up to him that is very impressive. The vista through these hilly regions that show the work of the locks open right in front of him. And he's just so impressed with that. And all of a sudden you have these explosions that blow these rocks all over the place. And you can imagine the little pebbles are streaming down on him but he's so impressed, it doesn't bother him. And in fact, at the dinner that eventually occurred in Lockport, Lafayette says in his toast, he toasts to nature's greatest invention or work, Niagara Falls, and mankind's greatest work, the 5 locks of Lockport. So he tied those both together. And again, is he being just diplomatic, or does he really mean it? You kind of get the impression when you read all the stories that he really means a lot of what he says. Because imagine this, so he's 67 years old, he's lived his life. It was a tough life. He was vilified in Europe by a lot of people. Why? Because he was born an aristocrat, but he acted like one of the common people. So the aristocrats didn't trust him because he was against what they were for. The common people didn't trust him because he was born an aristocrat. So he's caught like in this middle, this purgatory region, and he ends up in jail. He's just not very well appreciated. He comes to America. It's the total opposite. I mean, everyone just adores the guy. It's like he comes up and, mother's come, "Here, kiss my baby." And he did. So, it's like, maybe that's where that started from. Who knows? But he was so well respected and liked that it's just amazing. And you see this, and he returns that favor everywhere. So an interesting thing happened in Lockport. So this is actually the view when he came in. This is what he saw first. An interesting thing happened in Lockport that we didn't really find out until about 40 years later. Well, we know Lafayette was a Mason. So we knew that there were Masonic activities that he was involved with as he traveled through America, the rest of America. Not so much in Western New York until he gets to Lockport. In Lockport, he was invited to the Royal Arch something. I forgot the full name of it. So it's like a lodge or something for the Masons. And he goes there, and it's behind closed doors. Nobody sees what's going on. The minutes were published in the New York Times in 1865. And now they're publicly available. They're retained. They're public. You could see. And I actually looked at those minutes. The interesting thing about the minutes is it didn't really say much about what happened in the meeting, other than the fact, hey, Lafayette was there, his son was there, and all these other people there. Well, I was able to look up the names of the people who were there. So one of the names, Parkhurst Whitney. Parkhurst Whitney. Where did I hear that name before? Oh, he was the big burly guy in the hotel. So he was there. And then another guy was W. Rochester. William Beatty Rochester, could it be? So William Beatty Rochester actually gave the welcoming speech in Rochester. Is that my time? Am I done? No? Okay. All right. I'll go faster. Don't worry. So all these names were there that ended up going, either before or after Lockport. So those minutes were actually helpful in terms of the historic research. And because the minutes were published, I guess the Masons aren't as secret as you think they are. But as he goes from Rochester, he actually stops, he takes the canal. He takes the canal from Lockport to Rochester. Remember how I said things are really bumpy on the road, so he doesn't want to. Man, lava sewer really lit into Chautauqua County. That road was so bumpy they couldn't sleep at all. And then they had the trouble in the rivers and the water in Lake Erie was trouble. Well, they're on the canal. What's a canal? Smooth, just floating down the canal. 5 miles an hour, really slow. It takes them 12 hours or something like that to get to Rochester. It's just so small. So Lafayette says, best sleep we ever had. And in fact, it's funny because later on, like a few years after Lafayette was here, when you do research in newspapers, you look up, say, Lafayette. I want to see Lafayette in this time period, see what people say. There was this line of mattresses called Lafayette mattresses. And I'm thinking, holy cow, they should have grabbed Lafayette for an endorsement based on his Erie Canal travels. Anyway, so he gets off in Rochester, not on land. The boat stops on the aqueduct above the Genesee River. So they get off of the boat, they get out of the little cabin there. They don't see land. They see air. It's like in the middle of the air that they're at. At first they didn't know what was going on, but then they saw it was all deaded up with an arch and everything, and that's where the speeches were. Eventually they came down and got off on a carriage, and that carriage took them to Canandaigua, through Mendon, yay, maybe through Victor, maybe through Bloomfield, not quite sure. And in Canandaigua, again, it was big parties, big parade. He spent the next day at Jonathan Grieg's house, and then in the morning he left, and that's when he gets, for sure, because he might have been on the state road going into Canandaigua for at least a brief period of time. He didn't come into Canandaigua on state road, I'm pretty sure, just because of where the parade, he got at the head of the parade, and the head of the parade was not where the state road went into Canandaigua, but he left Canandaigua on the state road. So from there he goes into Geneva. Geneva, again, very quickly. Now he's traveling very fast. Why is he traveling so fast, by the way? So he made a promise a year before. Okay, here's what happens. A year before, he's in Boston. Somebody comes up to him and says, next year is the 50th anniversary of, the big, huge battle, the Bunker Hill battle. And we're going to make a monument for it. Do you want to lay the cornerstone? What does Lafayette say? Yes. So on the anniversary of the battle, it's June 17th, 1775 is the original. So June 17th, 1825 is when this ceremony is going to occur in Boston. Remember, on June 3rd, he's in Erie, Pennsylvania. So he's got 2 weeks to go from Erie to Boston. Now, I'm thinking, you guys are thinking, today's river. You know, you're in Erie, you're going to take the thruway, you call up your buddy in Boston, hey, I'll meet you for dinner. All right, you could do that. Not back then, no. So everything was way slower. Remember, he's traveling 5 miles an hour on the Erie Canal. So it's going to take him a while to get there. So he's rushing through. So he goes through Geneva. He goes through Waterloo. Waterloo, he meets the big building there, the Waterloo Hotel. And again, in there, he meets Masons in the Masonic Lodge there, but it's private. And then from Waterloo, he ends up going eventually to Auburn. And in Auburn, again, a big meeting. And the detail that I have on the travels through Auburn, let me get to there. There's that. Oh, yeah, I went through it real fast. If you want to see Masonic minutes, there they are, right there. So the details of him going through Auburn are very well written. The big thing in Auburn is this. There was a guy there, a preacher, a famous guy in Auburn. You probably recognize his name. Anybody know his name?
Stewart.
No, Stewart. No, he wasn't the preacher. He was a politician. What? Where's the hospital?
What street is the hospital?
There's a sign
Yeah.
next to the tavern.
Yes.
Right there, Auburn Public Theater.
Yes. So he was in charge of the seminary. He was also, I think he was the master of the lodge or something. So he gave an official Masonic welcome in public here in Auburn. So that didn't happen all over the place. Most of the stuff was behind closed doors. So that's really one of the things that stands out about Auburn. And again, Lafayette meets with all the people. In Lafayette, when he came, there was a line along the road. There was a line of Masons and there was a line of veterans. And that really led Lafayette down through the arch that he went through. And so he met with all those people. He arrived around 6 o'clock, had time for dinner. And then he left at 11 o'clock. And at 11 o'clock, that really closes the book that I wrote. I ended in Auburn. And that he goes on to Skaneateles and Syracuse. And Syracuse, he picks up the boat, and the boat takes him to Albany. And from Albany, he goes to Boston. So he was able to make his appointed rounds. And by the way, I did write the complete ceremony of the Bunker Hill dedication. And again, if you're interested, that's also a Masonic ceremony. Most of these dedications, cornerstone layings were Masonic ceremonies. So he had one down south. I think he did one in Vermont after the Boston one. But the Boston one is the most famous. That's the one that's written up. It's very long. Daniel Webster gave the keynote speech. I don't know if you know too much about Daniel Webster. He was a great speaker. And when I say great, I mean long speeches. Long speeches. Now, here's an interesting piece of fact about the Bunker Hill Memorial. They laid the cornerstone in 1825. They didn't finish it for like 20 or 30 years later. It took that long because they didn't have the money for it. So they had to get the money for it. So when it was finally built and dedicated, guess who gave the keynote speech? Daniel Webster. Same thing, hour and a half long. So he bookends the monument there. I think that if you're going to think about what the world was like in 1825 and the impact that Lafayette had on our region, the greater Western New York region, it was really a sense of bringing us. Remember, not much happened here during the Revolutionary War. Yeah, you had the Sullivan campaign, but that was the only real thing. Compared that to what's happening in the other states along the seaboard coast, that's where all the big battles, even New York City, in upstate New York or Adirondacks, there's lots of stories, real history in that part of the state. Not so much in Western New York. But Lafayette coming through gave Western New York this sense that, yeah, we too are part of the Western New York. That's my mother telling me, Chris, you're done. So So, and I am done. I just wanted to leave it with that. One more thing, though, just to give you a sense of sort of like what it meant for us. So think about what we did in return. I mean, there's stories about in World War I, our soldiers, when we went to France, they said, this is for Lafayette. But the most significant thing is in World War II, in D-Day, when we helped liberate France. And on the 20th anniversary of D-Day, Eisenhower was still alive. So this would be 1964. Eisenhower is still alive. He's not president anymore. So he was president, not a president anymore. So you would think he would be the closest example of an American general going back to France and being thanked. Well, unfortunately, the politics of the time, the French government did not invite Eisenhower to the official celebration. Okay. So Washington got the backup prize. The backup prize was an interview with Walter Cronkite. And he was able to go back to Normandy with Walter Cronkite and actually visit the people there. So it wasn't part of the official celebration, but it was still on the anniversary. And in that, you could watch this on YouTube if you want to see it. You will see the French people honoring Eisenhower the same way the American people honored Lafayette. And that's pretty cool. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions or